Hi, I'm Dave Merlino.
I'm Dustin Sweet, and this is the Know Their Story podcast. We talk to veterans about their time in service, returning home from war, and transitioning out of the military. Hopefully along the way we'll inspire you to do the same with a veteran in your life.
Because sometimes all it takes to make the world a better place is sitting down with a friend to know their story. Okay, we are off and running. Episode 12 of the Know Their Story podcast. We're coming up on that terribly lucky number for our next episode. Maybe we'll just skip right to 14.
I don't know. I don't think so. I think we got to take it.
That's the old baseball player in me talking. With us as always, Dustin from Taos, New Mexico.
Hey, everybody.
I'm up in Seattle. Got a dark, finally rainy day to get some of the smoke out of here.
Yeah, it's actually super gorgeous. Your image has a reflection out your window, which I never see, which is pretty great.
Yeah, on my bicycle map there. We've got a great episode today. Joining us, first enlisted and served with the 175th Radio Research Unit in Vietnam, 68 to 69. Was there for a small event we like to call the Tet Offensive. Came back, and I don't know how, due to circumstances, went back to Vietnam, which I'll let you get into, as a warrant officer with Apache Troop, as an enlisted during Tet, warrant officer during an Apache Troop as a lift pilot, 70 to 71. Went on to a long career after that, serving in Panama, went to OCS, retired as a major and was a military attaché to Honduras, has a master's in national security affairs, and retired in 1990 before embarking on a very long second career that saw him in Afghanistan and Colombia and Central America. Please welcome Major Retired Ronald Glass. Thank you for joining us today.
Good to be with you all. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's our pleasure, Ron. Thanks for stopping by. How did you? So you've had a really long and kind of a storied career. So let's kind of start at the beginning. How did you end up? How'd you end up enlisting?
Well, by running out of ideas. I was, an 18-year-old, did well in high school, president of the high school boys and that sort of thing, but the family situation was not terribly good. So I went to an Army recruiter, completely out of ideas, and did the testing. They looked at the scores, said, okay, kid, you look like, you can do okay in the Army. And then initially they said, look, we have something for you that's so secret, we don't even know what it is. And that sounded great. So I joined the Army Security Agency. It was a 4-year enlistment. And with the promises that, no, you don't go to Vietnam, you go to Bermudas or Sinop, Turkey or Japan or Germany, and it'll be wonderful. And of course, we were the first class of traffic analysts, intelligence analysts, where all of us were sent to Vietnam. So that's how I got to Tet at Benoit Air Base with radio research, which now we can say, then we could not, but it was part of Army Security Agency, which is a subset of National Security Agency. Then on to, we did Vietnam, we did Tet, and then back to Fort Devens, Massachusetts, now closed, an industrial park, I believe, but there to instruct other ASAers when I got myself in trouble with a post sergeant major. Don't know if you want to hear about that or not.
Well, if you want to talk about it, we'll hear it.
Okay. I was, it was the middle of winter, and it was the second story of a building with lots of ice on the ledge outside, and we were ordered to clean the outside of the windows. And, being able to read, I picked up the company SOP on ice dangers and safety and that sort of thing. And I politely, I thought, told the first sergeant that, I don't think we can do that. It would be in violation of the regs, and it's a danger, So I got called down and shoved up against a wall, and the post sergeant major was called in, and I was told that I'd be doing KP for the rest of my life. After having served one tour in Vietnam, that didn't seem like such a great idea. So I went off to the post personnel office and I said, get me off of this post. I've got to get off. And so I qualified for, there was a West Point enlistment program, and there was also Warrant Officer flight school. And so I signed up for both and said, just get me off of the post as quickly as you can. Lo and behold, in came flight school. So I went off to Fort Walters, Texas. And of course, I had no belief I would ever graduate. I'd never flown anything. I was actually afraid of heights. But you know, after a lot of false starts, especially I had to learn to have my eyes open when they did this auto rotation where they cut the engine of the helicopter to do a landing without the engine. And it took me a long time to figure out that that worked better with my eyes open. But eventually, you know, graduated and surprised myself. Went off to advanced at Hunter Army Airfield, Savannah, Georgia. And we took tactical instrument flight training, qualified into the Hueys, and then my first assignment was at Fort Hood to do at the Steno Detachment, surveillance target acquisition night observation, where someone had the bright idea of flying these 10 million lumens searchlights that would be used in Vietnam to shine down on the enemy.
Wow.
Not that that would make you much of a target.
Oh, no, no. That's not a trace back to you at all.
Yeah, but I did get a lot of night flight and instrument flight training there, which served me very well in Vietnam, where you get these calls at 1 or 2 in the morning to go out and pick up, you know, a team at night. So from there, off to Vietnam, and you know, checked into Apache Troop, 1st of the 9th. They had just been deployed out to Song Bay, and still remember the flight out there. You know, I was now a warrant officer. I thought I was hot stuff, you know, and an officer anyway, which seemed great. And showed up in Cav land, and I said, "Where's the hooches?" Well, there are no hooches. I looked around, and lo and behold, there were no hooches for us. And I said, well, where are we going to sleep? I said, well, we just got out here. Here's a culvert that you can slip into. And until they get the hooches built, you'll be sleeping in one of these, in this metal city sewer culvert.
That's
Eventually,
great.
I got the hooches built, and they were just bigger culverts. But I had lived much better as an enlisted guy back at the Air Force Base in Panama than I did as a Apache Troop cavalry officer in Song Bay up against the border of Fishhook. So they were very primitive conditions. I mean, we literally were living in crates and city sewer culverts with sandbags stacked on top of them.
Well, that is the draw of the Air Force bases, is it not?
Yeah, well, we ate a lot better with the Air Force than we did with the Army. I remember the powdered eggs, so it's not the greatest. But it was kind of a somber unit that I joined. They had just lost Everett 2 weeks previous. It was, I believe, their first loss in quite a while. And I know you guys have covered that, I think, at some point. And I remember joining them as a co-pilot, but having a number of hours under my belt that one of our first missions was to go into Cambodia. And that was extraordinary because it was very foggy during the day. And we literally, I hope some of the other guys that remember this talk about it, but we didn't quite fly. We hovered from Vietnam into Cambodia, flying over the roads and careful not to go too high so that we lost contact with the ground. And this was early morning. We went in on a mission to rescue alert team that had been in contact the previous night. And so we hovered our way to the coordinates. The fog was starting to lift a bit. and it was kind of surreal. Our blue team was, we were parked. We actually shut down on top of a hill. Maybe not the smartest thing, but that's what we did. And our blues went down to the area where we thought the Ranger team was. And then they had a contact, and we're sitting up on the hill. I still don't believe it's real, but we were sitting up there kind of just watching the contact. It was really stupid because could have had other units behind us that would have taken us out. But they got the LRPs out, and that was my introduction in my first few weeks to life with Apache Troop.
Kind of a look back in history when the journalists used to watch the Civil War engagements just from the sideline.
I think we play mental tricks with ourselves. Later, when I went into more advanced training as a commissioned officer and armor, and I went to the infantry officer advanced course, I realized then just how stupid we were. Very brave in a stupid way. Yeah.
And you were mentioning you had a bit of a quiet period in terms of losses for a while, but then you had an enemy cause of mechanical, as they would say.
Yeah, we would go out on night missions with some frequency, and which for me was extraordinary. And I loved flying at night, but remember, we had no GPS, so they give you coordinates that you've got a alert team that is in contact and needs to get out because they won't make it through the morning. And I went out on one of those, and this was at night. And I still remember that it was flying just above the clouds on a moonlit night, and it seemed like you were skating on glass. It was so smooth. And of course, to find the exact area, we had to call artillery and call in artillery shells that were flares once we were in the area, so that we had a better fix on what the area was. Because again, we're just navigating with maps at night, and it's kind of black down there. So on this particular mission, the LRP team said, they were whispering on the radio, we'd like to get out, but we were making our way to the LZ and we're being pursued. They're saying this whispering so that the enemy didn't hear them, and so we radioed back, yeah, go ahead and pop flares when you get out to the LZ, or pop smoke, and so I remember we saw purple smoke pop. They hadn't called on the radio, and I said, okay, I've got purple smoke. No answer. So we set up for a long final going in. Then we noticed that the smoke actually set the LZ on fire at night. And what's going through your mind is you have this little vent hole at the bottom of the helicopter, and you go into a burning field. You just imagine that going right up and your whole helicopter exploding. But we were set up on about a half-mile final, now kind of low level over the trees, and the artillery flares illuminating the area, as was the fire in a portion of the LZ. And I hear somebody whispering on the radio, and I turn the volume up, and I told them again, I said, we have the smoke, and we're on short final. And all we heard on the radio was machine guns going off, contact, and them telling us they haven't arrived at the LZ yet. So that was the bad guys that were calling us in. And so we diverted in our accompanying red Cobra, put some rockets in where they thought that the bad guys were. We eventually got back there and picked up the team and got them out. That wasn't when I got shot down, but that was, for me, the scariest mission maybe I had, knowing we could have been letting on board some folks saying, take us to Hanoi, something like that. The day I got shot down, though, we had another alert team that was in contact. This was daytime. We go out to the side. I was with Rich Corselius, who's now, I believe, a priest, God bless him. And Rich and I, we make our way out to this area, and we have our red ship circling. We had a low bird that said there were chickens in the area, and that's never a good sign when you're picking folks up. Kind of a sign of movement or bad guys. Anyway, we set up on final, and LZ is kind of complicated because it had logs in there and some downed trees, and I was concerned that we were going to, have a problem in terms of settling to the ground. So we just planned on hovering. Got in, and I said, where's the lerps? Because there's no lerps in sight. And all of a sudden, the tree line on our right just opens up with a bunch of yellow flashes, AKs. And so I think I screamed to Rich, where the hell are the lerps? And he said, F the lerps, let's get out of here. And we had a lerp coordinator on board. Not that we wanted to abandon the lerps, but there was just no way. And so I got to about 600-700 feet. And some red lights were coming on the instrument panel, emergency instrument panel. And all of a sudden, and I had had this dream 3 days before, and the dream came true. And I was kind of outside of the helicopter looking down on the scene. The dream was, wait till you're on the trees before pulling pitch, before taking that last energy out of the blades. And now I was living the dream in a real situation. And so we got up to about 900 feet, and the helicopter started spinning because I'd lost the tail rotor. So I cut the power, which reduces the torque, but took all the pitch out of the blades. We were going down into the trees, and we were maybe 900 feet, and we went right into the trees. And I pulled pitch as we arrived at the trees. And then my next memory was, that's strange. I'm looking at a helicopter from outside the helicopter, and it's kind of upside down, and the emergency lights on the helicopter are flashing. There's something about that that's just not quite right. What I had not known is that I had been knocked out. My crew chief had pulled me out of the front seat, and I was lying on the ground in the jungle looking at the helicopter upside down. It come through the trees and then turned. And everybody was okay, except our lerp guy was in bad shape. He'd hurt his back really badly, but he was alive. And so then Rich and I argued. We had I pulled my pistol out, and we got a radio call that there was some BC en route to our position. So our red team was putting rockets onto their position to hold them off. And then we had a ship come in. This is near sunset now. We were worried we were going to spend the night, but ship came in with a cable hoist, jungle hoist, put it down, and pulled us out. Rich Crecilius, who was an infantry officer, insisted on being the last guy out, and he was. And we got on that lift bird, and we got everybody out. And it was a good end to a bad day. And that was the first incident that the troop had really serious in maybe 7-8 months, something like that. But that was the end of our good luck. We went back into Cambodia, and I went down another time. I was able to keep the aircraft until we got to a fire base, but I had over Cambodia, I got hit with 50, a hole that big in the blade. If it had been just a few inches and taken out the spar in the blade, then the blade would have come off. So, thank God for those few inches. And
a game of inches sometimes.
Yeah, we had our unit commander on board, and it was strange about awards. We would screw up and get into these bad situations, or they would send us into bad situations, and then trying to save our butts, they would actually give us awards for it. So it was a good deal,
You're like, I would have done that even if not the award.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, when it was our folks who were trying to get out, or someone we lost, or saving a downed crew, and we did that many times. I remember one horrendous day where a CH-47 crew crashed and literally burned, and pulling these guys out, skin was falling off, that sort of thing. But what was satisfying is being able to go in and get them out, or at least try to. And we were more successful than not many times. But the courage some of our guys showed, to just be there and not give up, and go in, and there's a good chance you may not come out. That's something you look back on. So.
We talked to one of the Blues, and he said that he's 50 years just been unable to kind of get past all of the bodies that they had to carry out. And it kind of finally hit him this last Memorial Day that even if they couldn't get the people out alive, he was finally able to look at the fact that, well, I still brought closure to those families and allowed them, to have their son back or their husband back and at least know what happened. And he said it was just weird after 50 years to finally be able to accept that.
Dan Tiggs was our Blue, great captain, brave guy. And he went through that many, many times. And poor Dan, he went beyond that. I used to fly him into these areas with this like 12-foot elephant grass, and you come hovering down on the grass and say, okay, it must be 3-4 feet. And they jump off with these 80-pound packs, and it'd be like 12 feet. And you could almost hear the oomph through the helicopter blades, But he forgave me many times. So.
Nice to be 20 and be able to get past that.
Yeah, no, Dan, Blue after Blue after Blue, the team, we put him into the worst situations, whether it was rescuing alert teams or special force teams that were in contact, or downed air crews, things like that. And they just came through every single time. Yeah, tremendous bunch of guys.
You're the first person that we've talked to on the podcast for our audience. The first person we've talked to who we've talked to a couple of people who did step down outside the wire, but they're able to clear the combat zone, maybe set down on them. They had enough forward speed to, by the time they set down, they weren't worried about the angry enemy that had forced them to land. But you're the first person we've talked to who has actually landed in an area of people who aren't very happy with you. I mean, the red lights start going off and you realize I can assume I know what it's like, but what is it actually like when you start realizing we're going down, and we're going down hard?
That's where the training kicks in, because you don't think about it. I was fortunate, and I'm not a particularly spiritual guy, but I no kidding, I literally had a dream like 3 or 4 nights before I went down with that very same scenario, but I was outside the helicopter looking down. So the day that we were actually shot down, I don't know that I was thinking of anything. I was reacting, and I like to think that it saved our lives. That if I had kept the pitch up, the blades collapse and you fall in full speed and you crash and burn. If I had not cut the throttle, which would be the tendency, you never like to cut the throttle because it means you're going down, but it keeps that energy in the blades as you're going down. So that's training, and that's why we train, so that we don't have to think about it, because there's literally no time. I never thought that, I kind of went to a spiritual place, but you're not really thinking through it. You're just reacting. I have 7 grandchildren today, and 4 adult children, and that training is the reason they're alive. It's the reason, that I'm alive. And, and later on, when I was a commissioned officer and working on training, I appreciated the fact that you have to work people hard so that they don't have to think, and they don't need to know how to react. They just react. You know?
Yeah, I was a range safety officer when I was with Customs, and you'd see people. I mean, you'd see some very talented people taking a slack day, or you'd see people who couldn't afford to take a slack day, like actually needed to work, and you just tell them like, "Hey, fight like you train like you fight." Like,
Exactly.
yeah, if you get, I mean, there are documented cases of police officers pulling their weapon and firing twice, reholstering it, because that's what they do on the range. And it's like, well, that person is still standing. So yeah, it is. The training is important, even if you have to do it all the time. That's why you do it all the time.
We, to do the things that we did, we also needed to make light of life at moments so that you don't really embrace how serious the situation is. And if anything, Apache Troop knew how to have fun too. I hope some of the guys have talked about that. I mean, whether it's fishing with hand grenades, which they did.
Were you one of the pilot? We had, okay, wait a second.
Oh, deer hunting.
Wait a second. Jim Brown, I think it was Ed Beal and Jorgensen, decided to destroy an enemy food supply and blew up a fish pond. And
that. And
we heard the pilots were not very happy when they picked them up. Were you one of those pilots?
When they picked up you talking about the deer or what?
No, they came across a fish pond that was feeding the NVA, and so they blew it up with hand grenades. But kind of like any scene you see in the movie where they blow up the whale and what goes up must come down. They were covered in fish guts, and so the pilots were not happy with them as they were hosing out the Hueys after they got back.
Yeah, fortunately I wasn't there that day. But I know our guys, a legitimate target were the elephants that were showing the back straps that they were carrying munitions. And
oh yeah,
those of us that love elephants, and I do, it's always sad that they had to be collateral damage. But yeah, whether it was rockets into elephants. On the light side was the deer hunting, although the Blues, I don't think, were thrilled with the fact that they were set down to go recover a deer for a barbecue in enemy territory. And I understand that probably was not the wisest thing to do. And then they got back and the cook said, wait a minute, the Army has regulations on the meat that we're consuming, and I'm not cooking this thing. So we did that in a private way. But yeah, there was I won't tell you that. I'm sure you've heard the Bloody Bart story.
We've heard a couple.
Which one?
That's true. That's true. Yeah, John.
Which
Bart,
one you got?
rest in peace. He's someone you want to look back on and enjoy all the crazy stuff, but when you were living it, it wasn't always fun. but a great Cobra pilot and great guy, and rest in peace. He passed away just a few years ago. Great American guy. Yeah.
Craig
We had our crazies, So.
Craig Jorgensen told him that, because Craig is the subject of the CBS video of Richard Threlkeld the day Craig got shot. And of course, now you can pull it up on YouTube whenever you want, but it used to be, you can go to almost any newscast, movie, if there's something about combat, there's a 50-50 chance it's Craig getting pulled out. And he said every time Bart would see that, he would call up Craig and be like, I think you would have learned to duck by now.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so you obviously made it out of Vietnam as we're talking here today. You get back, did you come back to the States? Did you go back to Europe? What was your path after Vietnam?
I got came back to the States and was humiliated in front of my mother. Here I was, a combat helicopter pilot, and I rented a Volkswagen Bug and drove it to San Diego and got almost to her driveway, but had to do a U-turn, and I couldn't figure out how to get it in reverse. I didn't know that you put the knob down. So that was my humiliation on return to the US. But from there, went to Panama, where I was with the Army helicopter company there, and we flew the Panama Canal. We did disaster relief. We flew a National Geodetic Survey. I took a Huey to 14,000 feet, best I recall, between two thunderstorms, another moment of idiocy and without oxygen, to get to Colombia in a helicopter. But it was an exciting time. We covered we went up to Nicaragua for the Managua earthquake in '72, 12,000 people dead in the city. Did operations out of the airfield there. And then I decided that as a warrant officer, I'd always done a lot of chores, which were really commissioned officer chores, whether it was writing awards or writing reports, things like that. And so I applied for OCS and graduated as most of the aviators were going to armor then, because there was no aviation branch at the time. So I graduated as a second lieutenant in armor. Went off to Fort Hood, where I served a bit as a platoon commander for the M60A2 tank, which had a stabilized turret, Shillelagh missile, laser designation. All of this was a test bed for the Abrams tank later. But actually, my helicopter pilot service, I think, was part of the reason I was assigned to that test bed unit at Fort Hood, where we practiced desert tactics, that sort of thing. And I went off to Germany as a captain, and was with the 2nd of the 1st Cav, initially in aviation, doing border recon, but then got assigned over to be commander of L Troop, which was patrolling the border with Czechoslovakia down in the Bavarian area. And then because I had learned Spanish with my wife, who is from Honduras, was assigned as a military attaché, assistant army attaché to Honduras during the Central American conflict. And that conflict, you recall, was the Nicaraguan Sandinistas were causing a lot of problems. The Russians were providing weapons. Cuba was providing insurgencies throughout the Central American region then. So I was one of 2 Army officers assigned to the embassy, and one of 2 Army officers authorized to be on the border with Nicaragua and Salvador and report on both of those insurgencies and the Honduran Army's reaction to those insurgencies. But I also got transitioned over to the C-12. So I actually qualified in the Air Force C-12, Beech Super King Air, with a 24th Convoy out of Andrews, in order to be assigned as an Army attaché and a purple crew member. Purple crew meaning that the attachés, one, we had to be pilots in Honduras then, and we had Air Force, Navy, and Coast Guard pilots also assigned. So we supported all of Central America as an additional duty. And then we did as an Army guy, I did my Army liaison stuff with the Mill Group, with the Honduran Army, and so I did that work there. It was fascinating and created my interest in democracy, insurgencies, and Marxist-Leninist tactics to overthrow democratically elected governments. And that experience kind of was my platform to later going to USAID as a democracy governance officer. But from Honduras, took command and general staff at the School of the Americas, learned a little bit more about insurgencies and how to counter them or resist them. And then from there, went to the Navy postgraduate school, Army guy at Navy postgraduate, in a year-long master's degree program for national security affairs. And then I was assigned as the national project officer for a classified program that was focused on emerging threats from Latin America. Most people can guess, Cuba and Nicaragua. And at that time, there were emerging threats in the U.S., and so we worked on that and hopefully contributed to the protection of our country from those Marxist threats, which still are threatened today, actually, in my opinion. Not necessarily from there, but from other quarters and in domestic quarters.
You said you were an observer on the border. Did you qualify for that job by telling them about the day in Vietnam when you sat on the hill and observed the fight?
That was a stupid day, so I didn't use that. No, actually, Dan, I took State Department political officer Al Barr. I remember in Honduras, we drove kind of did a border trace, and we drove to a place where Sandinistas had been putting landmines on the road in Honduras between Cifuentes and Trojes, and went out that day, and so I got to get shot at again. I looked off from we had an armored vehicle. I mean, it looked commercial, but unfortunately, it also looked like the vehicles that the Contras were using. So the Sandinistas, the road was 50 meters that way was Nicaragua, and we were in Honduras, and saw some mortar flashes and had my shucks moment, and then they opened up with machine gun fire, and we stopped in a defilade and turned the vehicle around, went off back from the way we came, and so that was my most interesting day in Honduras, and getting shot at again. But yeah, you know, the Vietnam experience, I think, just helps you maybe you know, react appropriately. As a helicopter pilot, you've got to be able to talk and read a map and chew gum all at the same time, and that kind of is a life skill that can serve you in a lot of other places.
Yep.
Yeah. But from our, I retired as a major promotable never put on lieutenant colonel rank in 1990 to take an aerospace firm position representing European aerospace firms to the US community. And after 2 years, I realized that wasn't the life for me. So I went back to Honduras to write my great Central American novel with my Honduran bride, and got picked up at the embassy as a USAID, U.S. Agency for International Development, officer in the area of democratic governance. So,
were you staying in Tegucigalpa, or where were you staying in Honduras?
Yeah, Tegucigalpa. Yeah,
nice.
Exactly.
It's a
I've
beautiful
actually
city.
been back to Tegus now, and this is a recommendation to the younger officers, is that USAID once upon a time was not really amenable to having a lot of ex-military guys with them. I think that's really changed, because over the last 2 decades, what AID has experienced is a lot of interaction with military in Iraq, Afghanistan, Sudan, other countries where we have military presence or special teams or whatever. So, you know, right now I think there's a real appreciation for former military to join USAID in areas which can range from democratic governance, security, to environment, to human rights, and I've kind of worked most of those areas and completely enjoyed it. So I had a 20-year follow-on career with USAID, and I often tell people, and I mean it, I think I've had one of the more interesting lives of anyone I've ever known, and always in the field. So literally, with AID, I went back to Honduras, worked governance programs, rule of law programs, human rights programs, civil society strengthening programs. And then from there, I went to Dominican Republic, worked on justice reform programs, and then to Nepal. Kind of picked up on some of my Army experience when I went to Nepal in 2002. We lived in Kathmandu for 3 years, but the city was surrounded by a Maoist insurgency. So, you could not just go out anywhere in the countryside. And I was the conflict management and mitigation officer with USAID in Kathmandu, and worked on on funding programs to help, for example, single Maoist insurgent mothers who came out of the movement with babies. They were kind of trafficked as sex slaves within the Maoist movement in the field, and help them readjust and reintegrate into normal life, medical attention, that sort of psychotherapeutic attention. Also worked on the interagency planning to deal with the insurgency from the governance standpoint, and that is getting service delivery out to the field in these conflict areas where people are being killed, knocked off, just for not being Maoist. So, I got to kind of revisit some of the issues there. And then I went to Colombia with USAID and worked on justice programs, but also demobilization of the FARC. It's a misnomer to say they were really ideological insurgencies, because they became narco enterprises under this ideological banner, but they became businesses more than they became Marxist insurgencies, and got to work on those issues, and then did so well there, that's me saying it, that they sent me to Afghanistan, where for 2 years, where I became the acting director of the Provincial Reconstruction Team. And this is an office which grew from 36 to 104 people, and we had representation at 20 forward operating bases, AID representatives there, and also with the Regional Military Command. So I eventually became the civil military liaison to the ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force, and the US forces, and got to work on joint military civilian integrated security development planning at the provincial level, at the national level. And then my prize for doing Afghanistan for 2 years was to go to Russia, where I was with the US Embassy in Russia as the director of the Democracy Governance Officer, Democratic Democracy Transition Initiatives Office. And there we were supporting human rights groups and justice sector reform and anti-corruption programs, all the things which the Kremlin absolutely hated.
Anti-corruption in Russia, that's job security, fighting that.
It was an $87 million program, and so we were providing grant support to local Russian organizations to work on these issues of human rights, independent media, justice reform, anti-corruption. The Kremlin hated us, hated it, lots of dirty tricks, lots of surveillance, and eventually we were so successful that the Kremlin insisted that we shut down. So they told then Secretary Clinton that AID needed to shut all of its programs down, which was a real travesty. It was a historic strategic moment for the Russians, because they had two choices: continue the resurgence in authoritarianism, or strengthen the path towards a real democracy. Unfortunately, the Kremlin had all the assets, all the resources. They put many of our partners in jail, killed a few of them, still killing a few of them, the most recent trying to kill Navalny. Yeah, it was, going through Vietnam, defending against communism, working against communism and Marxism in Central America, in Maoist Nepal, and then ending up in Russia, and then, us being rather, well, we lashed out, in my personal opinion, with a wet noodle. We were approaching the US elections, and probably that administration then didn't want to say that the Russian reset had failed, but we failed the Russians that were supporting that democratic reform, and that's been upsetting, given that most of my life has been about working against what we know is a Marxism, a Leninism that kills not thousands or hundreds of thousands, but over the course of history has killed tens, hundreds of millions of people. And so as you can guess, I'm a little bit passionate on that subject.
Oh, the next in-person reunion for Apache Troop, I want to have a beer with you.
Yeah, no kidding. I got some questions that we're not going to ask on a documented format.
Actually, I have a. Go ahead, Dustin.
Go ahead, Dave.
No, I have a two-part question. One's going to go back to the past, so we can tie it into what's going on today. But what kind of country did you come back to from Vietnam? What was that experience like for you? Not necessarily the protesters at the airport, but just the experience of having been at war for a year in the country that you came back to. What was that like?
Well, I came back twice. The first time coming back enlisted in '68, feeling kind of lonely. I lived in my own little bubble, obviously, between family and military bases. So didn't get the worst of it. Figured out that there was room for common ground. All of us should hate war, but I had interactions with some of the protesters that tried to recruit me even when I was in the Army, and I was trying to help them or remind them of that not all that seems well, Marxism, Leninism, ends well. My high school girlfriend agreed to date me, even though she had become a hippie. That was kind of tough. Did no drugs. I did no drugs. I think she did. So yeah, it was a strange period. When I came back from Apache Troop, the second tour in Vietnam, I really I was in Nicaragua, or rather in Panama, and doing work like Nicaragua and Colombia out of helicopters. So I missed a lot of it. But what I am thrilled about is today, that despite all of the political discord which the country is experiencing, people hold up our U.S. military, and that really makes me feel quite good, and I think that they deserve it. Having done 2 years in Afghanistan as a civilian, I can tell you that this new generation of soldiers is superb. I cannot imagine the intensity of what they go through, and I saw it in Afghanistan, and they keep going back. And you talk to guys that have done Iraq twice and Afghanistan once and Southern Sudan and things like that. Just really a great generation of new soldiers and officers, and to be respected.
Yeah, I mean, it blew me away this morning when General Funk said his son has spent 5 years combined deployed to the Mideast. Yeah. 5 years of his life. But the reason I was asking is, yes, as a country, we do a much better job of separating the soldiers from the war. And even though there's a lot of correlations you could make, depending on the argument you want to make, between Vietnam and the Middle East, we at least don't blame the soldiers now. But the reason I ask is we talked to Lieutenant Colonel Lozano, who's a retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel, 2 weeks ago. And we were talking about the effect of the lockdowns on the mental health of soldiers. And he brought up an interesting point of, in today's environment, it's, from what he's seen, been very tough on returning veterans to have gone over and fought for something they believed in and come back to people telling them this is a terrible, they turn on the news, this is a terrible country, and as someone who came back from Vietnam under those same kind of correlations of, this is terrible, and trying to kind of take the honor from that service, I was just wondering if you had any advice for today's soldiers who might be going through that mental ringer, really, of having done something that they believed in honorably and come back to be told that they're defending a terrible country and it needs to be burned to the ground. I mean, literally in some cities.
Yeah. You know, first we fight for our unit rather than an ideology or even our country. When we're in the field, you're part of the team, and you fight for yourself, you fight for them. That's the day-to-day reality of it. In Vietnam, I know some people had to put on they had to put themselves in a place where they hated the enemy. And I, fortunately, I never hated the enemy, although I was certainly prepared to kill them. I mean, these were young kids who were being put out there much as we were being put out there. What those young kids didn't understand, which at least I understood at some point, was that the greater good was to fight there and resist the communism. When we withdrew, you know, everyone says you lost 350,000 Vietnamese in Vietnam, 54,000 Americans. Yeah, well, after we left, 1 million died, you know, because we left when the North Vietnamese invaded the rest of the region, Cambodia, etc. So, you know, when you come back and hear people say that it was a terrible, all war is terrible, and all loss is terrible, even of our enemies, these 18, 17-year-old, 16-year-old kids that died fighting us. And the humane thing is trying not to hate them, but be ready to serve the greater good, which for me is fighting communism and or fascism, wherever you find this blind violence or control. So when I came back, you know, I Navy postgraduate school elsewhere, I tried to develop our curriculum advisor, by the way, at the Navy postgraduate school, our first day, he said, "Gentlemen, I'm a neo-Marxist, get over it if you can." At the Navy postgraduate school for the curriculum advisor for Western Hemispheric Studies. Initially we were outraged, and then we got it. He was there to challenge us on what Marxism-Leninism is. And we also had guys like Frank Teddy, who had been a speechwriter for Ronald Reagan, you know, so they had it nicely balanced and it served us well. But, you know, I think we need to encourage our young people to read history, understand it, study it, and especially what happens under Marxist-Leninist authoritarian states, the tragedy not of thousands, but of hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
And so that's my argument to some of these younger people today, if they will listen, which many don't.
Well, I tell my girls, I have 13-year-old twin daughters, and I tell them, like, the lesson of history is you can vote your way into socialism, but most of the time you got to shoot your way out of it.
Absolutely, yeah, very good. But I'm worried about today. But when I got back from Vietnam, frankly, I was busy, and I wasn't living in San Francisco or Berkeley or some of those places, although Boston was close enough. So. Yeah. But, yeah.
Yeah. Dustin, you had something earlier when I
Oh, no, that you did exactly what I was going to do. Just connect those two pieces. Nice job, Dave. I wonder, you said you were part of this, the experimental tank piece. Did you maintain your relationship with General Funk while you were rotating into the armor?
No, I didn't, and he was way above my pay grade.
Yeah.
I would have loved to, but I didn't. Had some great commanders, Frederick Brown at Fort Hood, and we were the test bed for desert tactics. Actually, I had a chance to brief Ariel Sharon. I was picked to give him a presentation on what we were doing. So learned a lot there, which served me well later, both in Germany and subsequent assignments. But what was interesting is, you know, this was a $20 million turret in this tank, every bit as sophisticated and complicated as a helicopter. maybe not quite requiring the same dexterity skills, and we had 18-year-old kids, 19-year-old kids doing the maintenance. Other units were going home at 6, 7 at night. We were there till 1 in the morning, getting up at 4:30 in the morning for our 5-mile run, and just working our hearts out because we believed in that system, which was the most modern system of its time, between the Shillelagh missile, the laser designation, the stabilized turret stuff. A lot of it we now see in the Abrams tanks. So for me, aviation helped me adjust to that technical environment and challenge, and so I'm grateful to my aviation days for that.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think people lose sight of how young the Army is. When we screened, we did a kind of test screening of the film at the Museum of Flight last Veterans Day, and I had the question and answer period, and one of the audience members was a bit upset that we didn't shy away from what a downed helicopter is like. I mean, we have the tape of the day that Everett and his crew were shot down and killed, and Doc Del Valle gives an incredibly powerful, just 4-minute soliloquy of what it's like as a Blue to go into those burned wreckage. And we went back and forth on how we were going to cover it. And then we're like, this is a documentary and we're not documenting their lives if we don't tell the whole truth. So this lady was saying, I can't believe there's children here. And it's so, how come you had to be so violent in your description? And it's like, well, we've got to. And played it very political, like nice. And I said, well, they're my children. They're my daughters. They watched me edit the movie. This is, kind of like a premiere. There's no way they weren't going to be here. And I really regretted, I thought about it later, but, my girls at 13, out of everyone in the audience, are closest in age to what you guys were in Vietnam, dealing with that type of stuff. Everyone else is in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Like, these girls are 5 years removed from possibly having to do that. So it's a very sober reminder.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I freaked out because my daughter was the next one with a question, and my feisty daughter. And she starts out, before the question, she starts out with, first of all, and immediately I'm like, oh no. She's like, no one forced me to be here. And I'm just up on stage. I'm like, oh boy, oh no. So I finally was like, land the plane, McKenna.
One of the things that I had not experienced in Vietnam, but I did experience in Afghanistan, was the role of our women soldiers, who are also incredibly courageous and brave. And I can't even imagine, some of them are mothers with children back home being taken care of with family, and they put themselves at risk. They're in a war like Afghanistan, and many of our wars today, there's no front line. If you're driving a truck, you're as susceptible to an IED as anybody else. And so, one of my ancestors is Deborah Sampson, who fought in the Revolutionary War as a woman dressed as a man. She got away with it for a few years. You can find her in Google.
Disney's going to want to buy that story.
Yeah. Women, whether it's World War II or now in Afghanistan, Iraq, an important element, and we should never forget them. So,
yeah, it is. You're talking about an entire military now: fathers, daughters, sons, wives. You talk about it's very habit to say, a wife support group. Like, there's the husbands who have their wives are deployed, and everyone, we need to recognize that a bit better, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. But my memories of Apache Troop are probably the most intense, because the situation was probably the most intense, and the personalities colorful, the bravery and everybody so evident, and all of it kind of grounded in protecting our own, protecting and not leaving folks behind. And in that sense, and that's my hardest moment is when I lost my two roommates 2 weeks apart, Paul Fody and Larry Lilly. And the kind of guy that, Larry was, a lieutenant who, I still have this very vivid picture of him on his cot in our little 3-man hooch, reading the Bible, getting news about his daughter, who was, I guess, newborn or 18 months, something like that. And then, losing someone like that. The world needs more Larry Lillies, and we lost him. And I suppose God had a purpose in that, which is still hard for all of us to understand. And then, guys like Paul Fody, who's my other roommate from New York, very colorful, blustery New Yorker, a lot of zest for life, and to lose both of them in Cambodia, that is something that just sticks with you for the rest of your life. And I've been to VA hospitals. I don't have anything, I think, approaching PTSD, but if I do, it's the loss of those brothers who, I've enjoyed my life. I've had a fabulous life, an interesting life, but frequently, I regret that they didn't continue. And with every loss that we suffered, Osborne, Lily, others, it's to the degree where we enjoy where we are, we enjoy our family and our children. It's that deep, deep, soulful, tearful regret that our comrades who were lost didn't get to do that, with us. So that affects me, a lot still.
We've talked to some veterans who say, they decided that the best way to honor them was to live the best life that they could, and honor them like that. And that's all you really can do. Go out and live the life in the country that they died defending.
Yeah.
So, kind of very, very open-ended general question here. One of the ones we like to kind of wind down with. Just any advice in general you would have for today's veterans, or even other Vietnam veterans. Vietnam veterans still are we've been to 2 Apache Troop reunions now, and still people coming to their very first one, still coming to tell their stories for the first time. What advice would you have for veterans in terms of living that best life? Even now, it's not too late.
Well, one, follow your interest. Any work you do, hopefully, is something you enjoy. And if you're not prepared, and I'm talking to younger veterans now, if you're not prepared, get prepared. Continue to educate yourself. You can start off in community colleges, which are cheap, and then do your last year at a regular college. Your degree will be that last regular college, So, you only have one life. So live it, doing what interests you, what you enjoy. But also don't wait for anything to come to you, because generally it won't. You have to go pursue it, prepare yourself. In the world of the internet, I used to tell my team in my AID life that there's nothing I can't prepare for in 4 days on YouTube, using incredible source, except maybe open heart surgery. So become an expert. Use credible sources. There's a lot of fake news and sources out there, but whether it's a credible think tank or institute or educational resource, keep learning. And I still, I'm 71 now, and I hope I never stop learning. So I take advantage of all of these new resources. And for the younger folks, I would say that it doesn't seem obvious at first, but you come out of the military with a lot of important skills and in discipline, in management, in leadership, which is different from authority. Layer on top of that some specific skills in whatever area interests you, and you'll stay competitive. To the older guys, my generation, at this point, we're happy to wake up in the morning and be alive. Stay interested in life, stay interested in knowledge, and of course, cherish your family. That's about where we're at. At one point in my career, maybe both Army and USAID, I let my work consume me to the point that I was not as attentive to the family as I should have been, and that's a regret. So, don't let that happen. Keep a life balance. That would be my other piece of advice.
Perfect. That's absolutely perfect advice. And if even just one person, we don't have to change the entire world, just one person, it's worth it. Dustin, do you have anything to close?
Nothing for the record, no.
Well, I know enough not to ask for your off the record thoughts.
Well, I've really appreciated this opportunity, and I appreciate the work you all are doing to keep memories alive and lessons alive, and hopefully a new generation can build off of that. So thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us.
You've been listening to the Know Their Story podcast. If you made it this far, we must be doing something right. Let us know by subscribing to our channel.
And think about sitting down with the veterans in your life, because saying thank you for your service should be the beginning of the conversation, not the end.